Hello. Today we're going to be uploading a video on how to install KSP mods. We cover how to get the mods from things like GitHub, how to get the CKAN application, how to use the CKAN application to install mods, and we also cover how to set your application to run in OpenGL mode. Hopefully this video looks a little bit better edited than some of my previous efforts, but will be getting better and better as the channel goes on. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you find this video informative. Hello there! Today we are going to be covering our Tutorial Wednesdays, and today's topic is mods and installing them. This has come up several times during my normal streaming as questions as people ask me how to install various mods and how to make mods work and the best way to go about it. There are many ways you can go about it, and we're going to cover some of the more basic ones, and then we're going to discuss some of the details about trying to determine which mods you use and things to worry about when you try to install too many mods and things like that. So on the screen before you, you should see my Internet Explorer, which I don't normally use, but it was the easiest thing to use for this, as well as a window that is open to user/oaktree/desktop/Kerbal Space Program. When we are referring to that folder, in your case, it should be whatever folder your ksp.exe is installed in. And you will see in that game folder things such as the game data folder, KSP data, launcher data, and so on and so forth. If you're using Steam, it will be in your common apps folder for Steam. If you've installed it someplace else, you probably know where you installed it already. So let's cover the first part, which is how to get mods to begin with. So there are several sources for mods. The number one source that most people know about is KerbalStuff.com. KerbalStuff.com is a repository, and as you can see on the screen in front of us here, it hosts 1,132 mods. A lot of these mods are actually not quite up to date, so I'm not sure if that's actually 1,132 that have been updated for version 1.0.5, which is the current version as of this recording. So as you can see on the screen in front of you, we've got feature mods, which are handpicked by Kerbal Stuff admins, and as we scroll down here, you'll see a section for newest mods, recently updated mods, and most popular mods, and then you can browse in each of these subcategories. You can also search for a particular mod if you know the name of it. For example, if you were to type KSI into the search box, and wait for a moment, sometimes Kerbal Stuff can be a little slow to respond, but usually it's fairly good. You should get the KSI Placement Services mod, which is the mod actually created by me. Of course, now it's going to delay here. There we go. So the only result that came up for KSI was the KSI Placement Services, and so you can click on that and it'll show you information about the mod. It'll tell you the name of the mod, whether it's on CKAN or not, and we'll talk about CKAN later. And has a download button. It'll tell you what kind of license agreement it's been released under, what version it's been updated to, where the source code is, because by the Kerbal licensing agreement for mod makers, they have to make the source code available, the number of downloads for the mod, the author of the mod website, which typically for most mod makers is their forum thread, although in some cases it's not, and they may have their own mod website. Usually most mod makers have a way you can donate to their efforts, and then it might tell you how many people are following this particular mod. Now on Kerbal Stuff you can register, and if you register you can select certain mods to follow. Now all you would do is click download. It would prompt you on where you want to download it, and then you take whatever you've downloaded, and usually it's going to be in a zipped file format. You unzip it, and you look at the contents of that folder. Now every mod maker does this a little bit differently. There's not a lot of consistency here, but usually the contents of that zip folder are going to be dumped directly into your game data folder, which is a subfolder of your Kerbal Space Program folder. So for example, here you can see in our example we've got everything from toolbar all the way down to in alphabetical order Waypoint Manager. Now this is how most of the mods are going to look here, but one thing you need to know is that there is something called Module Manager. Many of the mods are going to require Module Manager to operate properly, and you're going to have to get that separately for a lot of the mods that you may use. Now, we'll talk about how to get that in a little bit here, but suffice it to say, most mods can stand alone. Some of them will say that they need other mods. Usually they'll say so in the information section here. And you can usually find the change log and it'll talk about what things they've changed and things like that. So it's fairly simple. You download it, it ends up in a zip file, you extract the contents of the zip file, you go to your Kerbal Space Program folder, wherever that happens to be on your computer, and then you take the contents of that zip, make sure you unzip it first, and get the contents inside the zip folder, and put it in your game data folder. And the number one problem I have people talk to me about when it comes to mods and installing them is making sure that they've put it in the game data folder and that they haven't put a subfolder, put it in a subfolder. So, for example, I've had people for a good example here is hold on here a second. I think universal storage is one that I've had some people ask about. So sometimes when you unzip it, you'll see a universal storage folder. You click on that and it'll actually say universal storage again. It all depends on where you get the file from, by the way. Sometimes the mod makers have them in different places. Make sure that you don't have like a folder inside a folder inside a folder inside a folder. When it comes to it, you should see like the core information here. Config files, that kind of stuff. Now, it doesn't mean there has to be a DLL in the subfolder right away, because they can have folders like that, but do watch out for things like when you have a folder named exactly the same as the folder before it. That tends to mean that you need the folder inside it, and copy that into game data. So that's how you do just a simple adding a single mod manually to your game. Then simply start the game up as you normally would, either using a shortcut or KSP here or the launcher, either or. Or if you've got a shortcut and you're using something like OpenGL, which we'll cover today as well, you'll want to do it through the shortcut. Now, the other place where most people get their mods is GitHub. GitHub is a repository for files, and it allows people to update and create different versions, track issues, pull requests, that kind of thing. The important thing to know is that you'll find something that looks a bit like this. This in particular is Cybutek's Kerbal Engineer folder, and it's simply github.com/cybutek/Kerbal Engineer. Now this one is not on CKAN, which is why I've pulled it out separately. And as you look through here, it's got an assets folder, documents, Kerbal Engineer, output/Kerbal Engineer, and a few other informational things. Now what you need to do is click on download zip, and it will download this entire directory as a zip. And I actually happen to have done that already over here, and you can see in here when I downloaded, when I double clicked on it, it opened it here, and we have Kerbal Engineer Master. And I would double click there. Now in this case you might think, oh, I'll grab that folder, right? Because it says that's Kerbal Engineer and that's what I want. Well, in this case, the Kerbal Engineer folder is actually the source code. What you actually want is the output folder, and under there, there's a Kerbal Engineer folder, and you can see the DLLs and all of that there. So you go back a step, and this folder, which is under Kerbal Engineer-Master, and then under Output, there's a folder called Kerbal Engineer, and this is the folder that you would copy into your game data folder as a whole. So you just go into game data, and I believe we already have Kerbal Engineer over here somewhere. Or is this my MechJeb version? Oh, this is MechJeb. So to install Kerbal Engineer, you would simply drag and drop in here and copy, and poof, we've now installed Kerbal Engineer into this build. Now again, that's how you manually install mods. And I'm actually going to remove that for the moment just because we're going to be doing some other things in a little bit. I want to keep that folder as it is. So that's how you install mods. It's not that hard to install mods manually. The big thing you have to know is where to get them, either Kerbal stuff or someplace like GitHub. And the best place to find the GitHub repositories is to go to your KerbalSpaceProgram.com forums. There's a forum on Kerbal Space Program called Add-on Releases. This is where new stuff comes in. when a mod is updated or when a mod is first posted, you'll usually find it someplace like here. Some of these have extremely large numbers of replies and views. For example, the USI Survivability Pack has 920 replies. Ferrum Aerospace Research, otherwise known as FAR, has 11,638 replies. So you can see these streams can get, these threads can get rather large in their information. But for example, let's just click on, we'll pick one at random here, the USI Survivability Pack. It will always tell you, well, mostly always, tell you where to get the mod on the first section here. So for example, it'll usually tell you something about the mod, tell you what the mod does, usually tell you what it requires or what it redistributes in the way of additional files, and then, as I said, it'll tell you where to get the file. In this case, if you open that file, you're actually going to get actually, it took me to a different place than I expected. That's funny. I think his link is a bit off. That's funny. But normally it would take you to either a GitHub page or a Kerbal Stuff link or something like that. And it usually will also tell you, well, it should tell you where to get the source code as well. If you're a mod creator yourself, you can use the source codes as sort of a reference. Don't copy and paste people's source codes, but often it can give you some insight into how various things have been created. So this is how you get mods from the Kerbal forums. You just find a mod that you want. This is also really useful. Reading through these forums is really useful to find mods that you might not have known about, or mods that have information in them so that you're like, well, I don't know. What mod should I install? Well, in this case, you know, you might go, oh, well, here's the information about Precise Node. Actually, this is a modification of it. This is Precise Maneuver Editor, but it's like Precise Node. Very similar in appearance. In any case, the point is that if you want to find new mods that you haven't heard about, there are really two best ways to do it. Either look at Kerbal Stuff for their newest mods or newest updated mods, or you know, like featured mods or their newest mods and just start browsing through them, or recently updated mods. You're going to want to make sure that it says version 1.0.5 or whatever the current version is. And finding them on places like GitHub, usually you find those through the forums. Now, the other way a lot of people get mods is by a program called CKAN. CKAN is the Comprehensive Kerbal Archive Network, CKAN, and it has really become the module manager for KSP. There are some other programs like it for other software. For example, there's the Nexus module manager for the Nexus repository of software out there and things like that. The CKAN program you can find, you go to the Kerbal forums and you can find it. There's a download for the latest release, and that link takes you to a GitHub site, which is github.com/ksp-ckan/CKAN, and then you can find the releases under that. And you'd simply scroll down here, find the CKAN.exe, and download it. Now there are instructions on how to install it and all of that, but the important thing to know is I usually just dump the CKAN.exe in the same folder as the KSP.exe. Then all you have to do is run CKAN. You just double click it. Now the first time it runs, it'll ask you whether or not it can go and update repositories and all of that. You should tell it yes. And then as you look, it will list every single mod that it has access to that is compatible with the current version of KSP. Now, once you've installed those mods, to install a mod, all you do is put a check mark next to it and click Apply Changes. Once you've check marked something, it will tell you what your change set is. So, if you hit clear, it wipes it out, by the way. So right now we have a bunch of mods installed. You can see the check marks next to things that are actively installed. And if you log into CKAN, like I just did double clicking it, if there's an update available, you'll see an empty box next to update. So we can click, for example, here and here to update these mods, and click on Apply Changes. It will then list what changes it's going to make, which mod is involved, what the change is, and the reason for the action. And sometimes if you're installing a mod, it will say it requires another mod, or it will suggest other mods and then give you options on whether or not to install those mods as well. Simply click Apply. It will download the updates from Kerbal Stuff. And then once it's finished downloading the selected mods, it will then install the selected mods, and then you can start your program. So there's a Launch KSP button here, and you can actually change the command line for that with arguments here. For example, if you wanted to force OpenGL, you could add that as a command line segment here. However, I personally do not launch through CKAN. I launch through a shortcut that's on my desktop where I very specifically have pulled up the OpenGL through my shortcut, and I'll show that to you in a second here. But this is CKAN, so you simply select the mods, click Apply Changes. It will download the mods and install them. It helps prevent you from getting conflicts in mods, or at least tries to. It's not ideal in that, but it does make mistakes. It is not infallible, but it is one of the simpler ways to install a large number of mods. Now, speaking of a large number of mods, don't go crazy installing mods. The more mods you install, the more memory your program is going to take, and as of 1.0.5, there is still the 32-bit cap, which results in about a 3.5 or 3.7 gigabyte limitation to the actual application size while it's running. This means that that's the maximum amount of memory that it can actually utilize. So as soon as you've installed enough part mods that even loading the program makes it break that mark, you will get a crash before the program even finishes loading. So try to pick and choose the mods that you really want, and don't go crazy with mods. Now, there are some mods here that are supposed to reduce the amount of memory footprint, like Active Texture Management. I believe the other one is a Dynamic. Let's see if that's listed here. Dynamic Texture Loader. These all have some consequences in the graphics displays, and I've had mixed results with them. My best result has been using the OpenGL command line to reduce my memory footprint. But when 1.1 comes out, theoretically, we will no longer have this 32-bit limitation. We will have a 64-bit version of Kerbal Space Program, and then you can pretty much go crazy. Now realize, while the base KSP program is fairly stable, the more mods you add, the more potentials you have for conflicts or mods to crash your game. So even if we get to the 64-bit version, you're not going to just want to click, install all. In fact, even if you could, you wouldn't want to do that because many of these mods have conflicting things, or they modify the same thing in different ways. For example, there's both TAC life support and USI life support. Or there are mods that change the Kerbal verse. There's one that makes everything 1/10th scale of the standard Kerbal solar system, and there are things that make it realistic style, or realistic size. Now, obviously, those two mods are going to conflict. So you need to be aware of what you're installing, what you're hoping it will do, and that kind of thing. Here is my shortcut for my KSP-not-TV properties. And I call it not TV because I have a different one I use for KSP TV, where I stream on Thursdays. And as you can see, it's the Kerbal Space Program folder on the desktop, just like we were looking at. And it says KSP.exe. And note that's all in quotation marks, then a space, then a quote mark, then a hyphen, force, hyphen, OpenGL, all one word, close quotations. So by doing that, when I run this as this form, we get the OpenGL, which reduces our memory footprint significantly. By reducing the footprint, we're able to run more mods, and that, of course, increases the ability for us to have more interesting things in the base KSP game. Now, depending on your video card or your system setup, OpenGL may not actually save you that much, or it can cause some graphics glitches or some other problems. There is a way to do a DirectX 11, which I believe is 3D DX11, something like that, 3D11. The best way to find out information about these things is to go to the Kerbal forums. I highly recommend that if you ever have any problems with Kerbal Space Program, that you go to the official Kerbal forums. There are support forums both for unmodded and modded versions of Kerbal Space Program. So these things allow you to really find out what other people have been doing. If there's a particular mod that you think might be causing problems or that you have bugs with, almost every mod has its own website, which usually leads to its forum page on KSP. When you go to that forum page on KSP, you can read about other people who have had problems. I've actually found situations where there's been a patch released that is not part of the normal mod install, and so I can go to that, get that patch, put it into the subfolder in the game data folder so that we fix the mod, and away we go. One thing to remember is that you have to worry about the number of mods you have installed because the memory footprint, and you have to make sure that the mods you install, you know what they're doing and whether or not they conflict with each other. If you're going to use something like CKAN, be aware that you may get error messages and you may have some problems here and there. If you're doing it manually, be sure that you know what sub-mods are required by each mod. For example, as I said, many of the mods require that you install separately Module Manager. Now some mods bundle Module Manager in with their mod. If they do that, be aware that that might not be the most recent version of Module Manager. If you have multiple versions of Module Manager, you need to make sure that only the most recent one is actually kept and get rid of all the others. So for example, if I've installed 5 mods and some of those mods have installed older versions of modulemanager.dll, I need to make sure that only the most recent version is actually still there before I launch the game. Hopefully that explains sort of the core of what you need to worry about and some of the major pitfalls as you move forward through this kind of thing.